this is Danielle with Hollywood Breakthrough, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Eric Haywood. Mr. Haywood, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for taking some time to talk to us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, basically, I want to say you have a lot of great things in your past that help you get to your level. You're a writer, you're a director. You have a great new DVD that was a film called The Four of Hearts. But before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about your career and your path and kind of how you kind of got started. I know you kind of grew up in Milwaukee.
Yes, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, born and raised.
And you went to film school as well. So how did your career kind of take you from doing some of the things you're doing? Because from what I read, that you actually did some music videos in Atlanta, a vast career of different things before you got to being the official director and of your movies and films you've done.
Yeah, well, my original career plan, the reason why I went to film school was because I wanted to write and direct feature films. And I had looked into certain graduate schools, graduate programs like USC and UCLA and NYU, and they were all just pretty far out of my price range. So I needed a way to get the kind of experience as a director working with crews and working with talent and managing schedules and all that stuff, so that by the time I got to do my first feature, I wouldn't be stepping onto the set completely inexperienced. So at the time, there was a sort of burgeoning music video industry, and that seemed like the perfect entry point into becoming a professional. And I actually started directing music videos while I was still an undergrad in Milwaukee. I just sort of jumped the gun because I was eager to get started. I had sort of the sooner the better kind of approach to it. So I started directing music videos and put together enough of a music video reel to begin directing and producing videos for some nationally recognized artists. That took me to Atlanta because at the time, the majority of the videos that I was doing were rap and R&B videos. And at the time, Atlanta was the big, the hot spot for urban music in those days. So I had shot some videos down there. I had made some connections with some of the crew people and some of the equipment rental houses. And I thought, well, rather than going to LA or New York and really being a very small fish in a really big pond of other people trying to do music video work, why don't I go to Atlanta, which is, sort of medium sized by comparison. And ideally, it would be easier for me to make an impact and sort of stand out. And that's basically what ended up happening, because although I was based in Atlanta, I was doing work not only in Atlanta, but also in New York and Los Angeles and Houston, the Bay Area, and it took me all over the country. So that was sort of how the first phase of my career really began in the music video world.
Now, that tells a lot about, because a lot of people think they have to pack their bags up to go to New York or LA. And you basically took a different route that way, but you still got noticed. So from doing the videos, that got you noticed and got you some experience. But how did you get you to start going back to your love for writing?
Well, pretty much the whole time that I was directing and producing videos, I was writing screenplays on the side in my spare time, just because, my passion as a writer, doing music videos was great. And it was a great training ground from a production standpoint, but you weren't really telling stories. And I always sort of saw myself as a storyteller first and foremost. So I would literally get up in the morning, very early at 6 or 7 in the morning, and I would write for a few hours. And then, I'd put all that away, and then I would, go get dressed, and I would go to work in my office as a video director and producer. So as time went by, I just started, building one screenplay after another, just sort of trying to sharpen my skills and just get better at it. And eventually, I got to a point where I realized, if I continue on the music video path, this is going to be my only job forever, more than likely. And, there will come a point where I tend to try to look down the road when I make my decisions, which is, once again, why when I left Milwaukee, I tried to figure out what would be my best destination city and how that might impact my career and carry me forward, which is what resulted in me going to Atlanta as opposed to one of the bigger cities. So when I was doing music videos, again, I'm looking down the road and trying to figure out, 2 or 3 steps ahead, what's going to be the biggest or have the biggest impact on my career going forward. So I was writing all these screenplays and not really doing anything with them. I truly wanted to just get better at it and get more comfortable as, sort of finding my voice and my process as a writer. But then I got to the point where I kind of got burned out doing music videos. And I realized, I need to get back to my sort of first love, which was telling stories. So I more or less sort of pulled the plug on my music video career because I had a feature script that I was especially proud of that I was going to raise funds for independently and direct in Atlanta, using all sort of unknown local talent, keep the budget very low, and just use that first project as a calling card. Because one of the things that I have been noticing is that a lot of people have a lot of energy and drive, and they have a lot of great ideas, but one of the things that some people lack is the follow through. So you'll meet a lot of people who say, I want to be a director or producer or an actor or whatever, but, they don't have necessarily the completed calling card to show people that they can take an idea from concept all the way to completion. So my plan was to shoot a feature in Atlanta, like I said, using local talent on a very small shoestring budget. And on a whim, I sent the script to a friend of mine out in LA who was a working feature producer, just to get his feedback on the quality of the writing and any notes he may have had. And he really liked the script and said, you know what? I'd like to help you get this made on a bigger level with some name talent, a bigger budget, and, but the catch is you'll have to basically stop everything you're doing for it right now in Atlanta. I mean, I was literally scouting locations, and I was getting money from investors. And, my producer friend said, you have to shut all that down because if we do this, we're going to try to make this a studio feature, and we can't have the same project being, sort of shopped around, or you can't be in pre-production on your thing while we're trying to actually make it, something bigger and better. So once again, I was faced with one of those sort of fork in the road decisions, which option will I take? And I decided to take my producer friend's advice. I shut down the project, gave all of the investors their money back, released, cast and crew, and sort of rolled the dice on trying to get the film made in Los Angeles on a sort of, bigger level. So what happened then was I thought, once again, this is my pattern coming back up. I realized, okay, if this is going to, I have a friend who's an experienced working producer in Hollywood who wants to get my film made, via a studio. I should move from Atlanta to Los Angeles so I can be there to capitalize on, the project and, snowball it into my second and third project, which will be a lot harder to do if I'm on the East Coast when all these things are happening with it on the West Coast.
Right.
So that caused me to move from Atlanta rather to Los Angeles. And then, this was sort of my inexperience with Hollywood was really showing, because I assumed that because I had a producer who took an interest in my script and was committed to shopping it around, that meant it was going to get made, in a heartbeat. And what ended up happening was the script did get shopped all over Hollywood, and people liked the writing, but nobody was ultimately interested in buying it or making it.
Okay.
But along the way, I had been rewriting. People would, we would send the script to a studio. They would say, this is really good. It was a Black family drama, and at the time, people were, and to a certain extent, it's still that way today. But more so then, people were very sort of short-sighted about, their ability to find an audience for a film with that kind of subject matter. So people would say, we love the writing, this is a cool new writer, but we don't know who the audience is for this project. So we're not going to get behind it, but we read it and we have some thoughts. And so they would send me notes, and my producer friend would say, well, such and such studio passed, but they had some notes, and I think some of them are really good. You might want to, take a look at them and apply some of them. So I would take those notes, and I would do a rewrite of the script, and then we'd send it out again. And then same thing would happen. Some studio would say, good writer, nice story, good script. We don't know who the audience is, so we're going to pass. But we have some notes if you want to pass these on to your writer for things that we think could make this, even more appealing for the next person you shop it to. So my producer friend would pass those notes to me. I would do another rewrite of the script, and this pattern went on for a few years, and finally this sort of ran out of steam, and it looked like the film was ultimately never going to get made. But then what happened while all of those things were going on, the script ended up in the hands of a woman named Felicia Henderson, who was creating a TV series called Soul Food, which is a spinoff of Soul Food, the movie. So she read my script, and because Soul Food was a Black family drama show, she got, what I was trying to do with my script. And she offered me a job writing one episode of the show's first season. So that was my first foot in the door of the TV world.
And that was Soul Food, the series?
Yes. Yeah. For Showtime.
Okay.
So, she, I guess, was happy with the script that I turned in, because then she offered me a job on the writing staff full time of the show, beginning in season 2. And so I took that job and stayed on the show from season 2 until the show concluded in season 5. And by then I realized, remember how I said I was doing all these rewrites of my feature script and I wasn't really getting it sold?
Right.
I realized, with television, because there's a schedule that is pretty much carved in stone, the stuff you write is going to get shot, and it's going to get, produced, and it's going to be seen by the public, because we have, X number of hours in the season that we have to fill. So I realized, coming back to, my first love of being a storyteller, I realized, this is a really great opportunity to actually, see the fruits of all my labor, as opposed to just writing and rewriting and polishing scripts and having people say, nice job, but ultimately, passing. So now I came to LA with the intention, like I said earlier, of being a feature film writer and director. And then I sort of took this detour into television. So I was on Soul Food for a few years. And then that sort of launched me into writing everything from this very short-lived cop drama on NBC that was called Hawaii, that lasted for, I think, all of 7 or 8 episodes.
I did watch that show.
Oh, you did?
I did. I mean,
okay.
I liked it. There were some things
You were the one. All right, thank you.
There's some things I kind of thought we should have been kind of a little different, maybe with the different cast possibly, but I did like the show.
Well, here's the thing that I realized from working on that show is that when a show is brand new, everybody involved, from the network to the writers to the cast and even the crew, everybody has a slightly different, not so much different, but everybody has their perception of what the show is and what the tone should be and what kind of story should be told. And it takes a little while for everybody to kind of get on the same page.
Right.
So I can honestly say there were times when, we as the writers were looking at a finished episode and it's like, oh, okay, well, that isn't quite the story that we originally pitched, but it's similar, but you can kind of see where different people had exerted a little bit of influence over the story and kind of took things in a slightly different direction. But by the time we were close to, what ended up being the end of the series, episodes 8 or 9, things began to gel. Because in the writer's room, you will get the rough cut when the director, finishes it. You'll get a chance to look at it while it's still sort of a work in progress. And I observed that the show was basically beginning to find its legs. It was beginning to find its voice. And, it wasn't a thing of, anybody did anything wrong in the early episodes. It's just sort of the natural process of making a TV show. It has to kind of find its feet. And that takes, a few episodes. But unfortunately, just as we got to that point, I felt, they had pulled the plug on the show.
Wow.
So then what happened was the original feature script that I came out to Los Angeles with that had subsequently sort of died out in the past few years came back to life, because I got a call from my agent completely out of the blue who said that the Hallmark Channel read the script, loves it, wants to make it. That was a film called Relative Stranger that aired on the Hallmark Channel a few years ago with Eric LaSalle and Michael Beach and Cicely Tyson. Oh, but my agent said, but there's one catch. They know you haven't directed a feature before, so, their requirement for buying the script is that you basically have to relinquish the director's share, because it's going to be kind of a tight budget, and they want to be as sure as they can be that they have someone who knows how to, keep the trains running on time.
Right.
And by that point, I was willing to let it go just to see the film actually have a chance to get made and shown to the public. So that ended up happening. So that was a good lesson in the idea that nothing is ever truly dead. Like if you write a screenplay and you can't get it made or can't get it sold, if it's good enough, it only takes one person or one company or one network or one studio or one producer. If they're the right one to get behind it, then it'll happen.
Right, right.
So after all these years of trying to get the script made and not being able to do it, and then taking the detour into writing for television, now all of a sudden, this script of mine kind of came back to life as a TV movie. And I actually thought, you know what? Well, more people will probably see it on TV than would have ever gone out opening weekend in the theater to see it. So it's actually probably the best of both worlds. So that project happened. And then most recently, I ended up writing on another show called Private Practice on ABC for that show's final season. So, and then I skipped a huge thing. Right before Private Practice, I realized, okay, well, now I'm in this TV writer career, and things are going pretty well, but I still have this itch that I can't scratch. I still want to shoot a feature.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, well, you know what? I should do that now because I feel like I have enough experience between my music video work and my, having written for TV and been on the sets of various TV shows. Like, I know how to do it. It's just a matter of, do I have the willpower to actually get it done? So from that came 4 parts, what I call a romantic drama about a young married couple whose love life has kind of like, the spark has gone out. So they decide to spark things, back to life by having a one-night stand with another married couple. And the film basically deals with all of the emotional entanglements and, mixed feelings and regret and jealousy and all the things that come about as a result of them making that one decision. So I wrote that script, and we shot it all in Los Angeles. And the other good thing about the way this project came together was I had accumulated more relationships in the time since I had first moved to Los Angeles. So one of them was with Darren DeWitt Henson, who I had worked with on Soul Food. I had written the lead character with Darren in mind, thinking, you know what, this is going to be a super low budget movie. I'm never going to be able to afford him, but I still wrote the character with him in mind, sort of as my prototype, just to give the character a voice. And then once I started looking for talent, I said to myself, well, you know what? I should offer this to Darren just because, at the end of the day, all he can do is say no. So he's going to say no because I can't afford him. And then I will at least know that I swung for the fences and tried to get, my first choice. And then I'll just move on from there. So I contacted him and sent him the script, and he loved it and said, I want to come on board. And not only that, he was looking to get into feature film producing. So he not only came on board as the lead actor, but as one of my producers, and we, were able to build the film together.
Wow. That's great.
I know that's very long-winded. I apologize for giving you the long version of the story, but that's sort of how I got from start to hopefully not finished, but from start to where I am now.
Let's take a little bit back though. A couple of things I had some questions about.
Okay.
Calling card. So how does someone that doesn't have a lot of money to do a lot of things to create a calling card? Like you said, a lot of directors or writers are talking about doing things, but yet they didn't have nothing to show for to do that. If they don't have a lot of money to do that, what do you suggest?
Well, the calling card is going to vary depending on what your career path is. It's going to be one thing for a writer. For a writer, it's going to be a script. For a director, it's going to be a reel or a short film or something like that. For an actor, it's also going to be a reel, but it's going to be you having appeared in other people's projects. But since I know writing and directing the best, I'll try to, address those and maybe people can sort of extrapolate from that based on whatever their specific, career track is. Obviously, if you're a writer, your calling card is a script.
Right.
I don't want to say it costs nothing to write a script because ideally you're using some sort of industry standard professional software that formats your script the right way. But for the amount of, for what you get out of some of those programs, they're well worth the money, and they are, for all practical purposes, they're practically free over the life of time that you should be using them and the amount of projects you should be creating with them. So your calling card as a writer is going to be a script. And, I meet people who, tell me they're writers, and I'm like, Do you have samples of your work? And they're like, well, I'm working on this one thing. And it's like, well, you need more than just one thing, because again, if you have a script that you pass on to someone and it just doesn't happen to be their cup of tea, then you're stuck. If you've written an action movie and they're looking for romantic comedy, then all of a sudden you're not the right person for them, or vice versa. So writers should be cranking out new material constantly. And in my opinion, there's really no excuse not to be. Even if you have a job, even if you have kids, even if you're in school, there's no requirement for the number of scripts that you need, but you should be constantly working on new material. Okay. And then for directors, I feel like this is actually the best time to be a filmmaker, because technology has advanced to the point where the equipment that you need, again, it's not free, and I'm not going to pretend like it is free, but I definitely feel like it's dropped dramatically from where it was even 5 to 10 years ago. You can get a good quality digital camera and shoot something and edit it on your computer and put it on YouTube, and all of a sudden you have something that you can send links to people. It doesn't need to be a multi-million-dollar feature film. It doesn't need to be an episode of a primetime, TV show. But if you can show people either via a short film or a web series or what have you, that you have the talent, then, that's something that you can put together that will hopefully, serve as your calling card and get people to sit up and take notice. But again, it's like what I edited 4 parts myself on my home computer. I use the Mac. Okay. I got Final Cut Pro, and I'm not a professional editor by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, I went to, they don't do this anymore, unfortunately, but the Apple Store, they used to do these workshops for free where you can go and they would instruct you step by step how to use Final Cut Pro to edit a project basically from start to finish and output it. That was my school. Oh. I live a couple of blocks from a mall that has an Apple Store, and the guy who taught this to the Final Cut Pro class, he broke it into 4 weekly segments. So it was a 4-week class, and I took it more than once, because every once in a while I would begin to notice, if he does, week 2, he's going to address certain important things, but he's also going to, just in the course of teaching it, touch on a couple of other smaller, tips or tricks or processes for the software. So I would go back, 4 weeks after that to the week 2 class all over again and get the information sort of drilled into my head. And then once again, when he would touch on something that was, a small little tip or a thing that he would point out that he didn't do last time, I was still absorbing the information. So like I said, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, the Apple Store doesn't offer those courses anymore, at least not the one that's closest to me. But my point is, if you are resourceful enough, you can find ways to get access to this information without, spending a whole lot of money. You can also get on YouTube. There were times when I was editing 4 parts where I got stuck on a certain thing. I guarantee you can hop onto YouTube, enter your question, and find someone who has created an instructional video to tell you how to do whatever little function you're trying to get work. So there's a ton of free information. It's almost embarrassing how much information there's out there for free, that, it's gotten to the point now where when people tell me, well, I don't have a lot of money, I'm like, that's really no excuse. Right. You need to find a way to, organize your day in such a manner that you can dedicate enough time to explore these options and get a project made, because nobody's going to care if you say, well, I want to be a director, but I don't have a lot of money. Well, you know what? This other guy or this other woman who doesn't have any money also was able to find a way to get a project made using, a DSLR camera that they borrowed or rented, or they used their cell phone and they cut it in Final Cut Pro and then they put it online. And now when they meet someone, they can say, I'm going to forward you a link to my latest project. Right. And now that person has just moved to the front of the line, while you were, sort of like obsessing over the fact that you didn't have the funds to do something. Well, somebody else in your exact same situation, found a way around that obstacle. Completely doable. And for writers, you're thinking that writers you have met,
in your background, basically they just don't have enough material to actually push. Basically, they're stuck on maybe one or two things. And since you said there's not a limit, so what's the hump that they're trying to get past? What is the reason why they're saying they've not gotten enough material out there to do anything with? What's some of the things they've been telling you?
I don't know. I think that depends on the person. That reason is sort of going to vary depending on each person's situation. Sometimes it's a problem of access. I don't have representation. Right. Or sometimes it is a problem just not having the right piece of material that makes you stand out from the crowd, which means you now have to, keep generating more material till you get that piece that people, that make people sit up and take notice. It might be a TV pilot. If you're interested in writing television, that might be the thing. But relationships and networking are key. That's how most people, myself included, end up getting their representation, which then leads to them getting work. So you kind of have to go, not necessarily to parties, but you have to go to events and functions and introduce yourself and meet people and try to find out how you can, get your work in front of an agent or a manager who would be willing to represent you.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about some of your rewrites. You said that when you were writing the script, they passed on it, but they have all these notes for you. Did you feel like towards the end of all these people saying, here's some notes for you, did you lose a little bit of your voice because you changed so much during that progress?
No, actually, I didn't. I can only, first of all, when I got these notes, I recognized, even though I was very new to the industry, I recognized that I was doing this labor for free. So that sort of is what I used as my rationale to not accept any note that I was sort of fundamentally opposed to. But the other thing that I also learned is that, there are ways that you can take a note and that you may initially disagree with and make it work for you in a way that addresses the note giver's concern, but also doesn't make you feel, overtly compromised. But what did happen for me after several rounds of people sending me notes who had passed on it, I asked my producer friend, well, why am I finally came to my senses. And I said, why am I applying all these notes for people who actually don't want to buy the script?
Right.
Isn't this backwards? Shouldn't I wait until somebody buys it and then I apply their notes to please them? So that kind of was an eye-opening sort of epiphany for me. Like, wait a minute now. Like, nobody told me this. My friend was just like, we got some good notes. I agree with some of these. Why don't you take a pass and apply as many of them as you can? But I did sort of get to the point where I was getting a little bit burned out because it's labor. It's not, you're not working all day out in the hot sun, but still you're actually, stressing yourself out trying to jump through hoops to please other people. And then, like I said, it dawned on me that I'm trying to please people who had already expressly passed on the script. But I'm a firm believer, and I believe this then, I believe it even more so now, that there's no such thing as wasted writing. Because all those notes that I got and all those revisions that I made did make the script better, and they made me better as a writer. But no, I never at any point felt like I was losing my original voice. The film that ended up getting made by the Hallmark Channel is probably 90 to 95% of what I originally had in my head way back when I wrote the original first draft that I was going to shoot in Atlanta for virtually no money. So that to me is a home run.
And how do you go through the rejection and the feeling of burnt out? What do you do to get past that? And how do you get past it?
There's really it's an interesting question. There's really nothing that you can do to get past it. You just kind of have to get past it. And what I mean by that is, if someone, rejects your script or you get rejected for a job you were in the running for, you don't have any choice. You can't go back to that person and ask them to reconsider, or you can't go back and resubmit some new material. Like, you had your one shot, they said no, you now have to move on. I think that getting past it or dealing with it, for me at least, comes from this core belief that this is the thing that I was meant to do. And if I just keep at it, then eventually good things are going to come. And so whether that means you immediately let the rejection fall off your back, or whether that means you take a couple of days to be depressed and then pick yourself up. Whatever you have to do, once again, it's gonna vary, from one person to another. Whatever you have to do to keep writing or keep directing or keep doing whatever your sort of, your goal is, you have to figure out what that is. And sometimes you will have some dark times, but some people exercise, some people talk it out with friends, some people go into a cave and don't want to talk to anybody. Like I said, it varies per person. And I've done all those things at various times based on, given whatever the specific setback was. So, you may have to pull out several different tricks out of your bag in order to cope and survive. But you have to, at the end of the day, you have to believe in yourself and your talent, because if your whole belief system is based around affirmation from other people, then you're in trouble before you even begin, because every rejection is going to make you want to quit.
Wow. Okay. And what happened right before you did Soul Food? What were you doing, for income? What were you doing during that whole time? Because you were just in limbo. You didn't have Soul Food.
Well, I wasn't so much in limbo. I actually had a quote unquote day job when I first moved to Los Angeles, because I didn't know. Again, this is when I thought that my movie was going to get made pretty quickly, mm-hmm. because I assumed that things in Hollywood move very fast, because that's the sort of illusion that Hollywood likes to project about itself. Overnight successes and deals getting made and things like that. Things take years to get off the ground. I just didn't know that then, but I did know that I needed some source of income until that happened. So I just had an office job, and actually I was only in LA for about a year before I got the first writing assignment for Soul Food. And then I joined the show the season after that. So things actually, I was fortunate that things actually moved fairly quickly. So I never really felt like I was in limbo.
When you were done with Soul Food and you started doing Hawaii, when the show was pulled, how crushed were you with that? Did you feel like it was just, I understand you felt like you were just getting your stride but how hard was that to be there and feel that?
Well, it's always hard. I mean, I was there for the end of Soul Food. I was there for the end of Hawaii. I was there for the end of Private Practice. So it's always difficult when any show ends. But Hawaii, specifically because we were just getting started. But the thing about Hawaii was, when it premiered that fall, there was a lot of talk about how you really, even more so now, but, even going back a few years when Hawaii was on, even then, you would basically obsess over the ratings of your pilot, because that sets the tone for your chances of survival. And Hawaii did not premiere to the best numbers. So the writing was kind of on the wall fairly early on. It wasn't like things were going great and everybody thought we were going to go, 10 seasons, and then they pulled the plug out of the blue. We kind of saw it coming, even though everybody, doubled their efforts and tried to really do their best. But it wasn't a total shock, but it is definitely hard because, everyone from the writers to the actors to the crew, now you have hundreds of people who are, about to be out of work, and everyone's, concerned about work, because we're all basically living that freelancer lifestyle. Like, the most well-paid writer or director or actor that you can think of at the end of the day is a freelancer. They don't have 9-to-5 office hours and job security and, a Christmas bonus and paid vacation. Like, we don't have those kinds of things. You're still always looking for your next job. So it's more stressful. You can kind of tell once the show is facing cancellation, there's not a whole lot that you can really do to save it or to change the network's mind. So then your thought process shifts to, how am I going to eat? How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to get my next job? So those are the things you worry about. You don't really have time to be crushed. You might be a little bit for a little while, but then reality sets in and it's like, okay, well, I got to start thinking about where my next, job is going to come from. And
what did you do right after that then? You went straight into...
After that, I started developing a couple of pilots that didn't sell.
Okay.
I went back, and not long after Hawaii ended, a couple of years later was when Relative Stranger ended up going into production. So that sustained me. And then after Relative Stranger happened, developed a really nice relationship with the Hallmark Channel. in the process of making that project. They actually hired me to write another movie of the week for them, which I did and got, compensated for. That was right around the time when the economy began tanking.
Right.
And a lot of networks and studios were cutting back on their productions just to save money. So the second project that I had written for the Hallmark Channel ended up being one of the ones that they cut from their production slate. So it was good in the sense that I did the work and, cemented the relationship with them and got paid for it and all that. But it was one of those things where it's like it actually never got made and produced, so it's not a credit on my resume. But those are the kinds of things where, there are people I've learned over the years who the bulk of their career is, writing scripts or doing rewrites and getting paid for them for projects that nobody's ever heard of because for one reason or another, the projects fall apart and end up not getting made. So it's great when you can show the whole world the fruits of your labor. But again, you sort of very quickly realize there's a difference between the glitz and glamour of being able to point to a project and saying, I made that, and the bitter reality of I have bills to pay, so a paycheck at the end of the day is sometimes more important than the vanity of seeing your name on the screen. So I did Relative Stranger. I did this other project for the Hallmark Channel. So those things stayed me for a while, and that's when I began feeling like, okay, I really want to get back into doing my own feature film. Really, before this TV thing sort of continues to snowball, and that ends up being my only job forever. I still have that dream of doing the feature. That's where Four of Hearts came about. So not long after Four of Hearts was in the can is when I got hired for private practice. So I would literally be in the writer's room all day for private practice, and I would drive all the way across town back to my apartment, and I would turn on the computer and I fire up Final Cut Pro, and I would edit the film for an hour or 2 hours. And then I'd pass out, asleep at my desk. And then I'd get up the next morning and go back to private practice and work, and then come home and chip away at the film little by little. Not long after private practice ended, Four of Hearts we were ready to begin our film festival submission process. And then after that, we got acquired for distribution. The point is, there's a process. Everything is like kind of always in flux. Like, sometimes you may have to be juggling more than one thing at a time.
Right.
And sometimes, one thing will pay off years later than you might expect, or they may all pay off at the same time and catch you off guard. So those are all things that I've sort of learned over the years. Like, you kind of have to keep yourself busy because you really never know when, the next thing is going to finally pay off.
What's your process when you writing the Four of Hearts? What was your process when you sit there and you're looking at Final Pro and you're looking at a blank screen? What is the process? What do you do to get yourself going? What do you start first?
The first thing that I do is I spend a lot of time just thinking about the idea, and it's in the back of my head for a long time. And I feel like, if the idea never goes away, if it keeps nagging at me, that's how I know I have an idea that I'm curious enough about to invest all this time and energy into writing. I will, even before, I think I may have misspoken earlier when I stated the names of software. Final Cut Pro is video editing software. Final Draft is what I typically use to write screenplays. But before I even get to Final Draft, I would just open up a Word document and I'll just start taking notes and jotting down ideas, sort of almost like a diary, but basically just like, here's what I think would be an interesting thing to do. Here are some cool character traits for this character. I will generate a list of names, and I do that pretty much every day. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 4 hours. Sometimes I'll work in shifts. I'll get up in the morning and I'll write, all morning, and I'll stop for lunch, and then I'll come back to it in the afternoon and write until the evening. It varies from day to day. But I'm basically just writing out these sort of stream of consciousness thoughts and ideas and bits and pieces of dialogue, and it's all sort of a jumble, but it gets clearer in my head the further along I go. And then scene ideas begin to come to me. Well, I think this will be the cool opening scene. Oh, I have to have a scene where this happens, or that happens. So little by little, I accumulate all these notes. And at a certain point, I begin to assemble them into more of a coherent story. Once I have that, then I'll compile literally like a list of scenes in order for, the first act, second act, and third act. And then once I hit that stage, I'm finally ready to open up final draft and begin creating an actual screenplay. By then, I've lived with the story and I've lived with the characters, in some cases for months, if not years. So the actual writing of the screenplay is really just the final step of a really long process.
And if you had to start back over and you're talking to someone that's just maybe been writing for 10 years, just starting writing, what would you tell them to do, their process to get noticed? Besides doing the more and more scripts and writing things up, what would you do different, you think? In this time period, now since there's so many different tools out there, what would you have done differently if you're a writer and also a director?
I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I would do differently. I don't know that I would do anything too much differently. The tools that are available now weren't necessarily available or as accessible, 10 years ago. So the game has changed, pretty substantially. And because there are things like, YouTube or individual websites, there's more competition and it's even harder to really stand out. But I kind of feel like I did the best that I could given the time that I came up and the tools that I was given. But I, as far as what I would tell someone today, like I mentioned a little while ago, I think that getting your work in front of people and getting your name in front of people are the key steps. But now, even with things like social media, which wasn't really a thing when I first came out to LA. Now it's commonplace and it's every day. That's a good way to network, get your work out there and form relationships that can then, benefit you later on down the road. Like you have to do it the right way. You don't want to just introduce yourself to someone and in the first exchange, ask them to read your script. You want to build an actual relationship first. And then, you can sort of, progress the next level of trying to get your work in front of them. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for an immediate sort of rejection. But yeah, I definitely am a big believer in the power of social media as a way to get yourself noticed and your work noticed.
How proud of you are of Four of Heart? I mean, basically, it's everything you ever wanted to do and has your voice, and you did it at the time frame you wanted to do it in. So, how proud of you of yourself of doing that for yourself?
Oh, I'm extremely proud. It was one of the hardest things that I've ever done. I mean, it taxed me physically and financially and emotionally and mentally. But I mean, it was a huge undertaking. Even though it's a small film, I mean, we had a small but very dedicated and talented crew. We had a small but very dedicated and talented cast, and I couldn't have done it without all of them. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, there was me coming home from work, working on editing the film little by little. So I feel like for a couple of years, I've been pushing this boulder up the hill little by little. And, we finally got to the point where I've reached the top. So, I could not be more proud of it. I love it. I hope people enjoy it when they see it.
What do you think about some of these things going on like Netflix and different shows are actually moving to these different type of formats? Would you ever do something for a Netflix type or, I think...
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's becoming, once again, it's like things are progressing kind of quickly. When I first came to LA, getting your movie in the theater was like the huge, it was the big brass screen that everybody was striving for. Not everybody, but a lot of people. It was considered the cream of the crop. And then the last 7-8 years, cable TV slowly began, increasing its prominence. And then most recently, like the last maybe, 3 or 4 years, vendors like Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu, with their original series, they've, become just as prominent, if not more so in some cases. So, if you tell someone you're writing on an NBC show and someone else says, I'm writing on this new Netflix show, they're both equally respected. And they're both known for bringing a certain amount of quality to the audience. So I would jump at the chance to do something for Netflix or Amazon or Hulu. Absolutely.
Thank you for coming on the show. We learned so much from you and your history and what you've done to get to your level. Is there any advice you can give to someone that's an up and coming writer or a director, that either a quote or something that made you keep going, even when things are not going so good?
Oh, I probably should have some sort of very handy quote, but I don't, because like I said, a little while ago, I feel like, if you possess the drive within yourself to pursue a career, like writing or directing, there's no easy soundbite that will be enough to get you through some of the hard times. It really, in my view, needs to be internal. Now, you may hear something or read something that that resonates with you, that you think is kind of cool to keep in your pocket, but at the end of the day, when you've gone out and interviewed for a job that you are passionate about and you unfortunately don't get it, for me personally, the inspirational quote doesn't cut it, So like I said earlier, you may need, a little bit of time to work through the sort of feeling of rejection or the hard times or what have you. But you really have to find that within yourself, because that's going to be the thing that sustains you. And beyond that, one way or another, you should always be looking for ways to create more content. Even if you've written what you feel is the best script of your life, pat yourself on the back, put the script aside, and begin working on the next one. Because that script you can use to, pass around and market yourself, but you never know what's going to happen with it. It might take 10 years before the right person gets their hands on it and wants to either make it or give you a job or what have you. So in the meantime, what are you doing for yourself? You need to constantly be generating new material, because I find for myself that when things are going bad, I can always sort of retreat into writing a script. That's where I feel like I'm doing something that is fulfilling. I'm doing something that is fun and challenging, and, nobody can take it away from me. Like when I'm knee deep in the middle of a script and I've just written a really good scene or even a really good line of dialogue, it's like, well, you know what? I know I'm reminded why I'm doing this. It's not because I need someone else to validate me. It's because I feel confident that, and I can tell a story in an engaging way. And that challenge is what keeps me coming back to it.
Wow, that's great. And Four of Hearts hitting DVD.
It will be Four of Hearts available on DVD. You can get it from Amazon. You can get it from Walmart, Best Buy. It will be available for download on iTunes and also for rent from Netflix. I don't believe it'll be available for streaming from Netflix, but you can, if you have a DVD rental plan, you can get it on DVD from Netflix. Hits all those platforms.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Thank you so much, Mr. Haywood. I really appreciate you coming on the show. You gave so much help to so many people. And
definitely looking forward to the Four of Hearts. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.